Welcome, everyone. We're so happy to be learning together again. Today's class is Heschel's The Prophets with Dr. Dror Bondi. Dror Bondi with me is dedicated to bringing Abraham Joshua Heschel's thought to Israel, translating his words into Hebrew and transforming Israel by his spirit. Dr. Bondi's PhD is from Bar-Ilan University, and his translations and his own writings are highly acclaimed. And with that, I'll turn this to you, Dror.
Shalom, everybody.
Perfect.
Today, we are going to read one of the most radical interpretations of Heschel. This interpretation was so radical already in Heschel's dissertation in Berlin that when Heschel submitted his PhD dissertation to the publisher in Berlin in order to publish it as a book, one of the lecturers, namely Martin Buber, told the publisher, don't publish this book because this specific interpretation that we are going to read today. And Martin Buber was a liberal philosopher, and he has a spiritual perspective. And why this interpretation was so radical that even Martin Buber couldn't accept it. In fact, the interpretation was radical because the source from the Bible was very radical. Maybe one of the most radical texts in the Bible. And I don't mean the Akedah. There is, in my opinion, one more radical text than the Akedah. The Akedah, yes, the Akedah of Yitzhak on Mount of Moriah is only the second radical text in the Bible, but this is the most radical. I don't know if you read it ever, if you ever read it, but I mean the three first chapters of Hosea. Hosea is a small prophet, 15 chapters, something like this, but his first three chapters are. Let's read them. Today we are going to read with the source itself of this several psukim from these three chapters of Hosea. Who will be our first reader today to read this radical source from the Bible? I brought it with in the translation of the Revised Standard Version because Heschel himself used this translation most of the time. And let's try to read it. Just a moment. Yes, who will be our first reader? Emily, you want to be?
I can read.
Thank you.
When the Lord first spoke through Hosea, the Lord said to Hosea, go take yourself a wife of harlotry and have children of harlotry. For the land commits great harlotry by forsaking the Lord. So he went and took Gomer, the daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son. And the Lord said to him, call his name Yisrael, for yet a little while, and I will punish the house of Yehu for the blood of Israel. She conceived again and bore a daughter. And the Lord said to him, call her name Not Pitied, Lo Ruchama, for I will no more have pity on the house of Israel. When she had weaned Not Pitied, Lo Ruchama, she conceived and bore a son. And the Lord said, call his name Not My People, Lo Ami, for you are not my people, and I am not your God. So now we're starting chapter 2.
Yeah, thank you.
Plead with your mother, plead, for she is not my wife, and I am not her husband, that she put away her harlotry from her face and her adultery from between her breasts, lest I strip her naked and make her as in the day she was born, and make her like a wilderness. Upon her children also I will have no pity, because they are the children of harlotry. For their mother has played the harlot, she has conceived them, has acted shamefully. Therefore, behold, I will allure her and bring her into the wilderness and speak tenderly to her. And there I will give her her vineyards and make the valley of Achor a door of hope. And there she shall answer as in the days of her youth, as at the time when she came out of the land of Egypt. and I will betroth you to me forever. I will betroth you to me in righteousness and justice, and in steadfast love, and in mercy. I will betroth you to me in faithfulness, and you shall know the Lord. And the Lord said to me, go again, love a woman who is beloved of a paramour and is an adulteress, even as the Lord loves the people of Israel, though they turn to other gods and love cakes of raisins. So I brought her for 15 shekels of silver and an omer and a letech of barley. And I said to her, you must dwell as mine for many days. You shall not play the harlot or belong to another man. So I will be also to you. For the children of Israel shall dwell many days without king or prince, without sacrifice or pillar, without ephod or teraphim. Afterward, the children of Israel shall return and seek the Lord their God and David their king, and they shall come in fear to the Lord and to his goodness in the latter days.
Thank you very much. I hope that my introduction was helpful and the text was not too radical for you. What I meant when I said radical is especially about the kind of prophecy. What kind of prophecy we have just read? Yes. What is the meaning of being such a prophet? Heschel told us in his introduction to his book that he is going to invite us to meet the prophets, to understand the prophets from within. He called us to identify ourselves with the prophets, but who can identify himself with such a prophecy? Who can hear God called him to do such things? Yes, to marry such a woman, to call his children in such names. And then in chapter 3, what is the meaning of this another order of God to the prophet? Yes, this is radicalism of this chapter. But of course, there is also textual problems in these chapters. And the main problem is what is the relation between chapter 1 and chapter 3 to chapter 2? Yes, chapter 1 and chapter 3 were written in a realistic way of writing. This is a story about what happened between God and the prophet. God told me this and this, God told me this and this. This is the style of chapter 1 and 3. But chapter 2 has a very different kind of writing, right? Who speak with whom in chapter 2? In a way, it is the next chapter in the story. Yes, in the first chapter, Hosea married such a woman and called their children in such names. But then in chapter 2, we read what happened in the next chapter of the story of Hosea and his wife, right? We can understand chapter 2 as if Hosea spoke to his wife and told her to leave their home, and then after wilderness time, called her back and promised her to love her, etc. But of course, when we read chapter 2, it's not about Hosea and his wife, but about God and his wife. Yes, who is the wife of God? The people of Israel, right? Yes, when he said, yes, here, for example, yes, when she came out of the land of Egypt, of course, we understand that it is about the Exodus, right? Here in chapter 2, we can understand all this story as an allegory, right? Like the Song of Songs. We know that the prophets a lot of time use metaphors and other literature tools in order to express their prophecies. And in chapter 2, if we had only chapter 2, we can read it as other prophecies in the Bible, like allegory, right? Metaphors. The husband is God, the wife is the people of Israel, the harlotry is the idolatry, but we have also chapter 1 and chapter 3, the realistic chapters. What happened to Hosea in chapter 1 and 3? Yes, the gap, the change of the style between chapter 2 and chapter 1 and chapter 3 calls us to think that it's a realistic story about Hosea and his wife. What is the meaning of such prophecy? Why God told Hosea to do such things? What do you say? Do you have any ideas? What is your interpretation of these chapters? Anyone want to suggest?
I don't know what really happened, but certainly I think that the narratives in chapters 1 and 3 have us, like, it's almost as if Hosea is acting out the metaphor, like in his own life. And I don't know, is it possible God almost wants him to feel what God feels? How can he communicate to the people God's anger or disappointment, or if he doesn't feel the experience that God is having?
Yes, this is the way.
Like, you know what else I want to say? It's almost like God is saying to all the prophets, it's easy for you to write metaphors, but they're just metaphors. They're limited if you're just writing them. Be them.
Yes, this is the way that Heschel will go in his interpretation. And it is a very radical way of understanding the Bible, of understanding the challenge of being prophet. A prophet is not only someone who God gave him a text. A prophet is someone who God tried to share with him his own experience. And in order to share an experience, you have to experience it by yourself. Text you can understand by your mind. In order to understand experience, you need to use your own experience. And let's read Heschel's saying about this chapter. But in the beginning, Heschel told us other interpretations, which try to go in more rational way. And so who will be our next reader to read the rational interpretations? Yes, Judith, thank you.
The account of this strange incident has been a puzzle to commentators. They have found it morally repugnant that God should have commanded a prophet to marry or even remarry an adulterous woman. The suggestion has been made, therefore, that the incident took place in a vision or a dream and was never carried out in real life, or that the story was told as a parable or allegory. In addition to the historical and psychological problem, the question of the meaning of the marriage has often been discussed. Some scholars maintain that the purpose of the marriage was to teach through demonstration, to let the people recognize in this conjugal affair, played out before their gaze, a picture of their own conduct and fate. The impulse to this theory comes from the fact that the prophets of Israel often performed symbolic acts in order to demonstrate dramatically their message to the public.
Thank you. So this is less radical interpretations, yes? The first interpretation of the dream or vision or allegory is the most of our classical interpretations, like Rambam and Abarbanel and the medievals. Yes, they went in this way of interpretation to speak about it as allegory. But and the second way is there were some scholars who tried to understand it as if it was a play, as if Hosea and his wife played this demonstration before the people in order to shock them, in order to make them understand the deep meaning of the allegory. Yes, there are people who can't understand allegory until they see it as a play. But Heschel wanted to go in another way of interpretation, and let's read his way of interpretation. Judith, do you want to continue? But you should unmute
Judith,
yourself.
just unmute first.
Sorry.
Perfect.
One thing is clear. The primarily given and immediate spiritual datum in the story of the marriage is the prophet's experience. The event stirred and shocked the life of Hosea, regardless of its effect upon public opinion. It concerned him personally at the deepest level and had a meaning of the highest significance for his own life. As time went by, Hosea became aware of the fact that his personal fate was a mirror of the divine pathos, that his sorrow echoed the sorrow of God. In this fellow suffering as an act of sympathy with the divine pathos, the prophet probably saw the meaning of the marriage which he had contracted at the divine behest. The marriage of Hosea was no symbolic representation of real facts, no act of recreating or repeating events in the history of Israel or experiences in the inner life of God. Its meaning was not objective, inherent in the marriage, but subjective, evocative. Only by living through in his own life what the divine consort of Israel experienced was the prophet able to attain sympathy for the divine situation. The marriage was a lesson, an illustration, rather than a symbol or a sacrament. Its purpose was not to demonstrate divine attitudes to the people, but to educate Hosea himself in the understanding of divine sensibility.
Thank you. So, indeed, it's a very radical interpretation. And
can I ask you a question?
Yes, of course.
One sentence I just read feels like a contradiction.
Yes.
Where he says this, its meaning was not objective, inherent in the marriage, but subjective, evocative. What does that mean? If it's not objective, inherent in the marriage, then it didn't really take place? I don't understand. What is he saying?
I think that he tried to say that the meaning was not objective, like a message, but such a meaning that you can understand only by interpersonal understanding.
The message
subjective, evocative, right? There are, how can we understand love? Yes. There are people who try to understand love from reading in dictionaries. This is not a good way to understand love. The only way to understand love is experience love. And when you first you felt your mother's love to you, and then you saw the love between your mother and your father, and then or other couples that you met, and and then you felt it as a child, as a teenager, and this is subjective evocative understanding of meaning. Yes, it is not a definition of love, objective definition of love. Yes, the meaning was not objective as the meaning. Yes, and only by living through it. Yes, this is the next sentence. And only by living same experience that God experienced, yes, God felt that we are, the people of Israel, behave like such a woman. The only way to understand what God felt was to live it through your own life. And Heschel explains that it was as time went by, Hoshea became aware of the fact that his personal fate was a mirror of the divine pathos, as if it was a reflection about his fate, about his marriage, as if he suddenly understood that God let him live such a life in order to make him understand God's own life. Yes, this is how Heschel explained this radical story. And of course, I didn't explain before, yes, the meaning of the name of the children, etc., in the source itself from the Bible. Yes, he felt in love with Gomer. Maybe he didn't know her problems, and when his first child was born, he felt that God told him to call him Israel. Yes, you know what is the meaning of Israel? Israel, yes, El is God, and Isra means that God is the Father, right? And but here there is another interpretation. Israel is also a name of a place. You know, in the Galil, there is a valley, Israel Valley, and next time in Israel, when you come, I recommend you to go to the place. There is a kibbutz with this name, Israel, and just below the kibbutz there was the palace of King Achav and his wife Izebel. Yes, you know the famous story of Navota Israeli. There was a simple farmer, and the king and the queen wanted to buy his land, and this farmer Navot told them, I can't give you my land. This is the land of all my father and ancestors and etc. And they deeply wanted this land, so they find a way to kill him and to take his land. And then Eliyahu Hanavi told the king, Haratzachta vegam yarashta. And how can you kill and then took this land, also took this land, yes, of this poor man? And the palace was just there on the land of Navot. And then Yehu, yes, Yehu, who was mentioned here, yes, was the chief general of the army of Israel, and he came to this palace and killed the king and the queen and become the new king. But then he also went in the same ways of them. So to call a young child Israel is a very harsh name. Yes, yes. I will punish the house of Yehu for the blood of Israel, for this murder of the king and the queen, and yes, it's not a nice name for a child. And to call your daughter Lo Ruchama, not pitied. If you see in the first son, yes, the Bible told us that she bore him a son, but with Lo Ruchama, the Bible wrote bore a daughter, not for him, not of him, and also in the third child, yes, she had went not pitied and bore a son, again, not of him. This is why he called this son Lo Ami. This is not mine. He is not mine, child. And but then Heschel explained after such a tragedy, marriage life and family, Hosea suddenly understood that his own life was a prophecy. Yes, in which
So I just want to make sure that you're seeing the question in the chat. Would you like me to?
I'm sorry. Thank you.
No, it's okay. Do you want me to read it to you?
I can read it. I can
Okay,
read it. I didn't spoke about chapter 3 yet. Yes. The question is, first of all, what happened in chapter 3? Yes. And here there is a dispute between Christian interpretations and Jewish interpretations, because there are Christian interpretations which said that here chapter 3 is about the new wife of God, the New Testament. Yes. And the Jewish interpretation says that no, this is about the same woman, Gomer, who God told Hosea, or Hosea felt that God told him to bring her back. Namely, that after the Galut, after God will take out half of the land of Israel, he will bring us back. What was the question in the chat?
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, okay. Yes. So I'm just saying that it's hard from the beginning for him not to feel that there's a purpose and a message to his actions if they come from God. It's not like it's his own idea to do this. And then he discovers his feelings through this action, this strange action that he himself has taken. I just a little bit, it's hard for me to see that it was not a message, a symbolic set of actions that had a message, since it comes from God. It's hard to see it just as his own self-discovery.
It's something between these two options. Yes. What is the meaning God told me? What happened to the prophet? To the prophets, they hear the voice. What is the voice of God? Yes, they see words in the sky. What happens? What is the meaning of prophecy? Yes, what happened in the minds of the prophets? So Heschel here explained that though the Bible wrote, God told me, the prophet didn't mean that he heard a voice of God, but that he understood the voice of God from history, from his own history in this case. Yes, as if there are people in Zionism who felt that that the history of the state of Israel is a God saying, yes, and Heschel explained that here, for example, that there was no a voice of God in the mind of the prophet of Hosea, but a perspective of God. Suddenly, the prophet get out of his own perspective and saw his life from God's perspective, as if his own life was a saying of God, something like this. Okay, so let's continue, and now Heschel will explain it more and more. Let's continue to read. You know, in if you remember, of course, in our previous class we spoke about Amos, about justice of Amos. And now, in order to explain Hosea, Heschel spoke about the differences between Amos and Hosea in order to explain Hosea. So who will be our next reader?
Amos knows God as a selfless and exalted being whose sensibilities and concern for justice are painted by the sinful transgressions of Israel. The emotions suggested in his prophecies are not spontaneous. Apart from the active emotion of disdain, these emotions are reactive, provoked by human deeds, resistance, and abhorrence leading to rejection. It is Hosea who flashes a glimpse into the inner life of God as he ponders his relationships to Israel. In parables and in lyrical outbursts, the decisive motive behind God's strategy in Israel is declared.
History.
In history, is declared. The decisive motive is love. God is conceived not as the self-detached ruler, but as the sensitive consort to whom deception comes and who nevertheless goes on pleading for loyalty, uttering a longing for a reunion, a passionate desire for reconciliation. Hosea centralizes the various incidental reactions where Amos sees episodes, Hosea sees a drama. The pathos that moves the soul of Hosea, the soul of Hosea possessed in contrast to its elementary manifestations proclaimed by Amos, a complex structure. He was struck by the whole drama of God's relationship to Israel, a drama composed of various acts and stages. What would have made it possible for Hosea to attain an inner identification with all stages of the divine pathos? A mere knowledge of what has come to pass between God and Israel would have enabled him to have a genuine sympathy for the present emotion, the disillusionment, but not for the whole gamut of experience, for all stages of the inner drama that preceded the present. The scope of sympathy is limited. One must share the experiences or similar experiences in order to share the emotional reactions to them. Only a revival, one by one, of past happenings, together with the reactions they called forth, would enable the prophet to experience sympathy for the drama. For this purpose, the full story was reenacted in the personal life of the prophet, and the variety of divine pathos experienced and shared in the privacy of his own destiny. Love, frustration, reconciliation.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So here we can see how Heschel fell into the source of the prophets in order to understand every one of them in his own way of prophecy. Yes, Amos has deep understanding and thinking about the divine justice, yes, but this is only an episode, one episode of the divine justice, of the anger of God, because we are behave in injustice way. Yes, so this is Amos, but Hosea has a very different kind way of prophecy, in which he tried to understand the divine drama. Yes, not as a one concept of justice, but as a inner life of God. And when you try to understand drama, when you try to understand history, not only a concept, you have to use much complicated emotions and process in order to understand drama. Drama you can understand only by drama. You have to, yes, living through the same, only a revival, one by one of past happening, together with the reactions they called first. Yes, the prophet Hosea wanted to understand the divine history, the divine experience of history. And this is why he can't only spoke about values, he had to experience by himself. He had to understand God by his own experience. This is life. As much as you have been through tragedies and complicated situations, your soul become more complicated, more rich. This is the price of deep soul. And maybe this is the challenge of tikkun, to take your own problematic experience and to use it in order to become a deeper person, complicated person, so you can help other persons. So this is another kind of prophet. Yes, Hosea brought his own experience in order to understand the inner life of God, while Amos only identified himself with the divine justice. Yes, it's a very different kind of prophecies. While in the prophecies of Amos, as Heschel told us in our last class, we heard mainly the pathos of God, the pathos of anger because of the justice, the divine justice. In Hosea is the opposite. We heard much more about the prophet himself, his complicated sympathy to God. Yes, there is the divine pathos, and there is the sympathy of the prophet. And in Hosea is the most complicated sympathy, in which he used his own drama, his own experience, in order to understand God's saying to him. So, as you can see, this is a very, I believe, unique interpretation of the Bible. It's a challenge to get into the life of the prophets, the uniqueness of every prophet, of every way of prophecy. What can I say? Maybe you can ask questions. Yes, I have nothing to say more, and so please use the time for your questions. Yes, Judith.
I think that someone was asking a similar question. It is not so much how did Hosea experience God's revelation, whether it was a sound or not, is not the issue. The complication for me is it seems that he knows while he is marrying Gomer, he knows that he's doing this at God's request or command, and he knows why he's doing it. He's being told all along, name your child this because. So he's not just reflecting on, oh my, I've had a life and I learned something from it. He is told to live this life and knows while he's living it that he's doing it because it's God's will for him to have this experience. It's a slightly different angle. Do you understand?
Yes, yes. If I can say, you suggest to Heschel to be more radical.
Right?
What?
You suggested to Heschel to be more radical in his interpretation.
Or I don't know if that's more radical, but it says God tells him to do these things,
Yes,
right?
yes,
And
yes.
that's the, it's one thing if you have a man who had a terrible marriage, turned out she was unfaithful, and then he realized that he could learn something from this experience and he begins to hear God's message in it. That would make sense. What makes, what is this terribly difficult thing to understand is that God seems to tell him to do this, and he knowingly marries, a prostitute or whatever she was, and knowingly has these children. God tells him what to name them. I see someone says forced empathy. Yeah, he is a vessel for God in the sense that God is using him to, you want to know what I'm really feeling? Here, do this, and then you'll know what I'm feeling. So it's not really clear whether Hosea at the very beginning already has a revelation and knows all along that he's doing this, or it's later on that he begins, because Heschel seems to say that he begins to understand, but no, he knew right away.
Yes.
It's very confusing.
Yes, Heschel tried, I think, to a little bit make the story less radical in this way. It's not that God told him to do such things, but a lot of time religious people understand their life as an order. When my grandma left Poland in order to come to Israel, she didn't hear God told her to do it. But afterwards, after the Holocaust, all her life she understood her decision as God's order. It's a religious experience, an authentic one, and I think Heschel tried to explain Hosea's prophecy in this way of religious experience. Maybe. Yes, Emily, you wanted to add.
I guess just a comment on Judy. I'm just wondering, isn't that almost a necessary aspect or of being a prophet, is to have the sensation that you're being called by God? In other words, if in the scenario that you describe, a person has this experience that hurt and then attributes it and says, oh, this is what I learned from it, or later on attributes it to God. I'm not sure I understand what I'm saying, but I feel like Hosea needed to have that feeling that he's being forced almost by God to do this. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but I feel like that's part of the experience of the prophet in this case. And it's almost like that feeling of, I'm miserable, but I'm miserable because God is sending me. I'm having this terrible, horrifying experience, but I don't know, I'm doing it. It's not realistic, obviously. And so I'm not saying, I'm not relating to whether it happens or not, but if it's a narrative, if this is a narrative about a prophet, the way the narrative is being told to us includes that layer of the prophet's like chosenness, or the prophet's, being commandeered by God to, I had another question also.
Yes.
It's so radical, but at the same time, it seems to be like the pshat. In other words, the other possibilities that Heschel quotes, that it's a dream or that it's a metaphor, those are definitely, in this case, it's really the pshat.
Yes.
I understand why some of the rabbis weren't happy with the pshat or had to do something else, but it really is, the author is really, or if it's Amos, I think we have to imagine Amos talking to does it start with Koamar? Oh, it's interesting. But this had to be, we usually think of a prophet speaking to the people contemporarily, right? Contemporaneous, like in his time speaking to the people. So he is telling the people a story. And the story is, God told me to do this and I did it. And this is, so that's very intense. To think that is the shot.
Yes. Yes, I agree. As I said in our last class, the confusing is not Heschel's interpretations, but the Bible itself. We are moderns. We learned Maimonides, who told us never think about God as someone who has emotions, etc. And suddenly, when we let ourselves to read the Bible in his pshat, in his literal meaning, it's astonishing. Yes, it's unbelievable understanding. I believe that the rabbis lost this way of religious experience, or maybe decided to change it to more rational understanding, religious understanding. Also today, there are people who prefer to understand their religious tradition by rational explanations, etc. And at Heschel, I believe this is the importance of this book, called us to meet the Bible in his own way of writing, in his own way of thinking, experiencing. When we let ourselves to do it, suddenly the interpretations of Heschel become our own interpretation. He only let us, he opened our minds to such reading, and suddenly we read it in the Bible itself. I have a question about Heschel, about his understanding of his own life. In our first class, he spoke about himself as a descendant of the prophets. How he felt about the murder of Martin Luther King. What happened to God in this occasion? How he understood the Holocaust in such a way of life. How he understood his own tragedies in his life. Yes, he lost his father when he was young. His mother and his 3 sisters were murdered by the Nazis. Yes, suddenly Heschel's own understanding of himself, I don't know how to understand him. And he really tried to go in this way of life, of this way of religious experience. And so how he understood the historical events and the personal events that he been through. I have no answer to this question. But maybe one of the things that Heschel tried to do in his philosophy is to create a pious human being which is very close to the prophet. What is the meaning of piety? What is the meaning of dvekut, of devotion? Yes, he tried to make it close to the experience of the prophets, as if in our regular religious tradition, the prophet is some way far, far away in the sky, and we are here without any understanding of hearing of God's voice. But Heschel tried to make it close, as if we and the prophet on the same continuation, as if the religious experience of every human being today can be in such a relationship with God. Yes, it's a very radical invitation to us, to the modern religious persons. So, in our next class, we will continue to meet other prophets by Heschel's interpretations. Isaiah, Jeremiah, please come to our next class. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Dror.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Very difficult stuff to teach. Thank you so much.
With my poor Hebrew.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for everyone for participating today and being part of our learning community. Thank you so much, everyone, again, and lehitraot. Until next time.